If you find yourself in a relationship where you are longing for more intimacy, you're longing for more connection, you're longing for more sex, you're longing for more fulfilling sex, you're wanting your life to be more than just waking up every morning, doing what has to be done, coming home exhausted, and ultimately feeling maybe a little bit of tension or neutrality with your partner. Hello, and welcome to The Things That Come Between Us. I am your host, Charu Morgan, and I've been working with couples and individuals for almost 20 years to help them feel more connected to themselves, to their bodies, and ultimately to their partners. On this podcast, we're talking about the things that come between us and the love and the connection that we truly desire. If you're interested in learning more about my work, you can go to charumorgan.com and we will put a link in the show notes so that you can learn about it more there. And thank you for listening. So in this episode, we're talking about what does it really take for a relationship to be healthy and vital, to be fulfilling sexually and sensually, to be a true partnership and to continue to deepen and really blossom. What are the building blocks of that? Because for most of us, nobody's ever talked to us about that. We maybe have never even thought about choosing to think about it or prioritize that or learn about it. We just have been, I have feelings for someone. There's some aspects of it that are natural as I move closer to relationship. Maybe there's some societal ideas of, well, I take this step, first we fell in love, then of course we're going to get married, then we're going to start a family. For some people, that trajectory is kind of really clear in our heads and maybe hearts, and we go forward with that. For some of us, it's that that piece is maybe less clear, but there's still a movement of like, I feel something in my heart, I dive into this thing, and then of course we just ultimately build a life together in some way. And most of us have never had any templates for what that looks like other than our family template or a cultural template. And that template, missing a few really important pieces. First of all, that template simply isn't right for everyone. That's just, whatever template we've learned through osmosis within our culture is honestly something that was decided for lots of reasons that oftentimes have nothing to do with the heart or with what may actually be true for each individual. And that's something that we can deepen on another day. But so even just the structures, who knows, maybe right for us, maybe not. But even beyond the structures, how to be in a relationship that has this consistent nourishment, or the fact that relationships even need consistent nourishment, this is likely not something that we witnessed in our families. It's not something that we see a lot in our culture. And so, of course, we are real beginners, most of us, when it comes to what it would take for a relationship to continue to thrive and be nourishing. And just like everything I talk about, we're not bad or wrong for not knowing. We just don't know what we don't know. And we just are living into these templates that are very hollow or even guided by misguided. Let's just say that. I feel like I could talk for hours about some of the reasons that they're misguided, but let's just stay to the heart of it and say misguided. So a lot of times our partnerships begin with a nice organic flow of nourishment, right? We meet someone, we like that person, we make space and time to have dates with them. Sometimes, this is not true for everyone, but a lot of times there's some excitement in the bedroom, relatively easy between us. We're prioritizing time, we're making space, we're thinking about nice things to do for that person. We're saturated in that, organic response of excitement and delight at the prospect of connection and intimacy with another human. And that, for some of us, can really carry us. And then, of course, carry us through that initial part. And then, of course, over time, as the realities of life sneak in, for those of us that stay committed to this one partnership, if that's the adventure we're on, then we have the realities of sharing a space, sharing a home, the realities of perhaps choosing to have a family together, the realities of our families of origin and how they interact with one another, the realities of working all the time and not having that extra bump of adrenaline that sometimes comes with initial excitement of potential love. And what I've seen is that once all of these things start coming in, two things happen. One, we don't have a ton of extra energy because we are tired from managing our lives. And the second thing is we just very easily fall into really taking for granted that the partnership is going to be there and that everybody's just going to play our role, whatever roles we silently decided together. And that's that. Again, most of us haven't been given the template that like this is the relationship is this living, breathing entity that needs nourishment in order to continue to grow, to blossom, to flower. And this is where I'm going to mix metaphors a little bit, because I think the most effective metaphor for talking about what can happen when we don't have the context that our relationship needs nourishment and kind of peeling that apart so you can get a better vision of it, I find a money example is kind of the easiest one. So forgive me from going from, and I'm probably going to bounce back and forth, of like a plant growing and being nourished metaphor and a money metaphor, which is much less romantic, but is necessary for some of the pieces that I want to share. So in our partnerships, just to gain some, it's almost like I want to pull you back so you can have a little bit of an overview here, is we can think about, if we're going to use this money metaphor, oftentimes we're taking withdrawals. There's things that take energy or are depleting on the relationship, on our partner. And this is not necessarily negative. It's just like stuff of life. There's going to be withdrawals, things that cost us something, and there's going to be deposits, things that give us something. And so there's no need to put a good or bad story on this. And things that might be considered withdrawals, or things like fights with our partner, not feeling seen by our partner, feeling like you're contributing more than your partner is contributing, building of resentments, one partner genuinely doing more of the work to run the household, one partner doing more of the work to bring in financial stuff, and ultimately lack of communication about all of these different elements can register as withdrawals from the relationship. Miscommunications, hurt feelings, and the things, it's not so much like who's doing the work for the home and who's doing the work that's bringing in the finances for the home. It's more, what is the impact that that's having in the unspoken elements of that, and is that building resentment? That's the piece that would be the withdrawal. And then there are the things that we can do to make deposits into the relationship. And those things are doing things that help your partner feel supported, help your partner feel seen, help your partner feel heard, genuinely helping. Like if there are physical things that are, just really overwhelming or challenging them, how can you maybe proactively look into how labor could be divided differently in the household? Making time for connection, making time for sexual connection, making time to listen to what their needs are that aren't feeling met, to what dynamics may be feeling like they're taking withdrawals, making time for mind nourishment and connection, and making time for a depth of care and devotion. Especially if we have littles, that can often really pull, like a lot of our deeply caring energy often goes to the littles, and there isn't necessarily a consistent caring energy that's being put back into the nourishment or the deposit to make into the intimate relationship between you and your partner. So one way that we can kind of experiment and get an overview of what's happening in our own life and relationship, well, of course, the first thing is to talk about it and to to open up the conversation. And another thing that I have found has been so helpful. This is really this episode is going to have a lot of practical tools. One thing that I found so helpful, that if you're listening in the car, you'll have to do this later, but you can kind of touch on it in your head. But I highly recommend that you take some time to write this down, is make a list of everything that you devote time to in your life. So that would be a list with, you're going to add things that I'm not necessarily saying out loud, but I'm just thinking of a few things that might be on your list. Work, schooling, working out, cooking, driving, time with your kids, if you have them, eating, meditating, watching TV, hobbies, self-care, resting, time with friends, time with your partner. And this one, I'm going to suggest that you separate out time with your partner, sensual time, and sexual time. I'm going to recommend that those are each their own category. And then what you can do is look that over and see how many hours are you spending doing each of those things. And oftentimes, what I find when I give this practice to couples is that there's at least 40 to 60 hours a week spent on work, right? That tends to be the reality. About 40 to 60 hours a week on work. And time devoted to your partner, maybe couples who have a scheduled date night, maybe they've got like 2 or 3 hours on a Friday night that they have devoted to one another. That's like dinner and a movie. Nice, that's lovely. Time devoted to sensual time, sometimes not much. Sometimes maybe there's like, cuddles in the morning, usually on a Sunday or a Saturday. Okay, so maybe that's 30 minutes total. And then sexual time, maybe there's some sex after the movie on Friday nights. And maybe for some people that's more. So even in a scenario where somebody has all of those things, what did I say? Like a 3-hour date night every week, maybe some sensual time, cuddling a couple times a week, that's 30 minutes. And then sexual time, maybe 15 to 30 minutes. So what was that? 4 hours total. So even just to look at that, your job, and some of this is just capitalism, right? But your job is getting 40 to 60 hours a week of you. And your relationship, and this is, you may be totally different than what I'm speaking to, but I've worked with a lot of couples, and in a best case scenario, and this is actually pretty unusual, would be a couple who has the schedule that I was just talking about, where it was somewhere around 4 hours, maybe, if you add up all those time devoted to the partnership. And I think when we see it in numbers like that, and I really encourage you to do your own numbers, I would say for most couples, it's actually going to feel like less than 4 hours a week, especially if you have kids, depending on how you arrange your lives. And then the sensual is usually even much smaller. Everyone's different, but it's important to take a look. And I often will say to couples, if you invested the amount of time that you invest in your relationship, in your work, how would your job be going? Probably not great, right? Like if you only invested 4 hours a week for your job, it probably wouldn't go so well. You wouldn't be getting the same amount of work done. The projects wouldn't be progressing. You probably wouldn't be set up for next levels if it's a kind of job position where you can, grow within the company. It's really hard for anything to grow in a substantial way with such a small amount of time invested in it. Mic drop, right? And most of us living today are kind of in some ways shoehorned into this being a reality. But there's just so much on our plates and so much that we need to do in order to just survive and try to make sure that we feed our families, keep a roof over our head, be able to pay for gas, all of those things. This plays a huge role in the dynamic. It's part of the soup that we're swimming in. I call this the capitalism flu, when you are so tired from your day job that you don't have a ton of energy to invest in your relationships. So I call that being sick with the capitalism flu. And there's not a lot of cure, right? Because you're still going to have to, do all the things to be able to be a person that participates in society. Depending on your socioeconomic status and all of those things, it's highly likely that your labor is taking up the majority of your time. But it's not only that, right? It's also this confusion about intimacy that's been handed down to us through generation after generation. It's, the dynamics that our parents had that were unhealthy that we learned from. It's the personal challenges that we have. It's the different things we've gone through in our lives. It's the things that have affected us and made us feel that we're maybe not deserving of love, so that the more we invest in it, the more we feel it. Actually, sometimes the more we shy away from it. And, that's just one example, but there's a million different things that are contributing to, even if we had all the space and time in the world, really investing in intimacy might still be confronting. We might still find reasons to not prioritize it. And so how do we work with this? If you find yourself in a relationship where you are longing for more intimacy, you're longing for more connection, you're longing for more sex, you're longing for more fulfilling sex, you're wanting your life to be more than just waking up every morning, doing what has to be done, coming home exhausted, and ultimately feeling maybe a little bit of tension or neutrality with your partner. Maybe that you're in a place where you're wanting more than that. Well, where do we begin? There's so much here. But a good start is, you could share this episode with them and start the conversation. Hey, I feel like I'm just on automatic pilot, and I feel like we're not as invested in nourishing the relationship as we were when we first began. And I miss you. I miss feeling close to you. I want this to be a place where we grow together. And I want to make time for that. I want to discover what it means to invest in this relationship growing, in being closer to you. However challenging that might be within the limitations that we have because of the structure of our lives. So even just starting that conversation could be an amazing, nourishing first step. And then once you've had that conversation, you can start really small. When I'm working with couples one-on-one, the assignment that I start with, and I will tell you this is really, really hard, especially for people with young children to actually make time for. The first thing that I say is 3 times a week, 5 minutes to 15 minutes each time, an investment in connection and intimacy. 3 times a week, that's it. 5 minutes. It could be 5 minutes each time, or it could be 15 minutes each time, but we're purposefully keeping it bite-sized so it's not overwhelming. And then I like to say, and maybe that's enough for you, but my next level invitation, I guess extra credit we could say, would be you're doing your 3 times a week of your short connections, and then 1 time a week, something that's 30 minutes to 90 minutes, where you're not watching Netflix, you're not eating food during that time that is genuinely focused on intimacy, sensuality, connection, getting to know one another on a deeper level. And so the first question, if this is sounding intriguing, if you're wanting to invest in your relationship, the first question that you need to ask yourself is, what would need to shift in order for me to make time for this? Because one of the reasons we're not doing it is it feels like there's not time for it. So really, we got to look technically here. I'm all about intimacy, connection, depth of romance, and sometimes a technical scaffolding, a logistical scaffolding is incredibly important to hold the structure of these, more loving, expansive things to open within. And I know I get this pushback every time I start to talk about scheduling it. What if we schedule these times? And I'm going to talk to you about what to do once you have those 5 to 15 minute times scheduled. Absolutely, I come against resistance. I come against people that say, oh, scheduling is so boring. So, blah, blah, blah. I have never, this is the truth, I've never had a couple that has actually executed this successfully and begun to nurture their relationship in a new way if they didn't actually put it on the schedule. For some people, it can work for it to be fluid, like, oh, it works for both of us. We both have a little time before bed, after we finish watching TV and before we fall asleep. So it doesn't have to be an exact time of day, but we aim to do it every day. And usually we hit about 3 times a week where we have this connecting time for 5 to 15 minutes, 3 times a week. So if for you, holding it more gently like that, yeah, we'll do it right before bed, can work, if that can work. And I really, really, really invite you to be very honest with yourself. If you think something a little more loose like that can work, try it for a couple of weeks and see if it does. And if it doesn't, I implore you to try to actually put it on the calendar. Okay, Tuesdays after you drop the kids at soccer and before I make dinner, you usually have that time when you come home. I know you're tired. Take 3 deep breaths and then we'll, switch gears and we'll have our 5 minutes. And we'll have the 5 minutes in a way that isn't dismissive of the fact that you've been running around and I've been running around. But we're going to just have that 5 minutes to the best of our ability on that, Tuesday, when you come home from dropping her off at soccer, right? And that's the placeholder, that's the space. And when you make these spaces to invest in your partnership, I invite you to make them as important as you would a work meeting, right? It's so deeply ingrained in our culture that we can be dismissive of these, things where we have more intimacy, could be friendship, could be relationship, and we can easily be dismissive of what that, they're going to be there later. We can push it back. It's no big deal. Part of investing in nourishing the relationship so that you can go to new places together is in holding a deep level of importance and respect for how you are going to show up. And that doesn't mean that you can never change it, right? Sometimes you have to change a work meeting. But it means that if you change it, then when you make that change, you make it the same way you would as if you were changing a work meeting. A little text, hey, looks like I'm going to need to run and pick up to go for dinner after I drop her off for soccer. So it's going to mean that I'm going to miss our 5-minute slot. Are you available on Wednesday instead at this time? Just like you would in a meeting. I know this sounds boring, but I tell you, I don't share anything that I have not lived. And in my deepest, most long-term relationship, we were so dedicated to the schedule that we created and to honoring it as if these were, meetings, giving it that kind of care and importance. And absolutely that enabled us to have intimacy, spaciousness, flow, depth of connection, time carved out for connection, even when life was crazy busy, through the entirety of those 12 years without any wavering. I mean, really, and we probably put this in place maybe, I can't remember exactly, year 2 when I got busier with my business. And we absolutely held it. It sounds super unsexy, but let me be very clear that it was what happened within those pockets of time that we made sure to create. And we created longer pockets of time than the ones that I'm sharing here. But I assure you that what happened within those pockets of time was deeply nourishing, incredibly vital, incredibly sexy, incredibly alive, even though it was on a schedule. And I think part of that is just can be a piece of the puzzle of one piece. It's not that everything has to be scheduled all the time, but in a world where so much is scheduled, most of us don't live in a world where things are free flowing. And if we did, maybe we would free flowingly make more time for our partnerships. But given that there is already so much on the calendar, carving out these pockets purposefully, handling them with care and purpose, honoring the time if it needs to be changed, these are all ways that you show your partner how valuable and precious they are to you, how valuable and precious this partnership is to you, how interested you are in investing and taking it to the next level and going deeper with them, how invested you are in your love and expansion together. So then what are we doing? What are we doing when you're making these times? Well, every couple is really different, I find, in what they need the most in order for the partnership to feel nourished. For some couples, it's going to be cuddles. Just the level of busyness, the level of go, go, go. There just hasn't been space for these pockets of like nurturing and bonding. And so if that's you, then one of the easiest and best ways to spend that 5 to 15 minutes, especially if it's just 5 minutes, is come into an embrace. Ideally, it could be laying down. Maybe you don't even feel like you have time for that. That's okay. Come into an embrace, bring your bodies nice and close together, and just breathe together. Just inhale and exhale, and inhale and exhale. And even just starting with that might feel like a lot to do even for a full minute. And you can put a timer on. I love using the timer on my phone. Hey, we're trying this new thing. It might feel awkward and boring. So let's put on a timer for 2 minutes and see if we can just breathe in together and out together for 2 whole minutes. Maybe that little bit of breathing together leads to a little bit of kissing. Maybe it leads to a little bit of sharing something from your heart, maybe sharing appreciation. That's another little exercise you could do. Maybe you breathe together for a minute, and then once the energies are like starting to open, you're starting to let go of some of the rest of the day, what's to come and what you just passed. And maybe you just take 2 minutes each to share what you appreciate about your partner. What could be something recent. I really appreciate that when I wasn't feeling well on Monday, you took care of all the things around the house that needed done. That just allowed me to get right back into what I had to do once I was feeling better, and I didn't feel like I had a backlog. That was really valuable to me. Or it could be more romantic than that. I mean, that in and of itself is pretty darn romantic, I think. But it could be, I loved how when we went to that party, I loved watching you and how you smiled and how everybody felt so comfortable with you. And that's something that I just love about you, is how you bring out the best in people and you can make anyone feel comfortable. See how simple these are? These are not things that are totally foreign to most of us. It's just purposefully making the time and the space, because when we don't, are we doing that? And for some couples, cuddling and sweetness is just happening for you. Maybe you snuggle every night. That's something that's been consistent even as you've gotten busier. But the piece that's harder is something that is maybe the acknowledgement. Maybe there's like a verbal piece that's been harder, or maybe there's a sexual piece that's been harder. And getting into something like highly sexual in a 5 to 15 minute slot is not ideal, because oftentimes one partner will feel a little bit rushed into it and it won't be totally authentic. But this is something you can talk about is, well, could we just, we have great rapport with the snuggling. I would love it if when we have our 5 minutes, because this is definitely something you should decide beforehand. What is the fun thing you're going to do with your 5 minutes this week? And it could be every 5 minute slot we have this week, we're going to do this thing. Or it could be on the first one, we're going to do this thing. On the second one, we're going to do this thing. On the third one, we're going to do this thing. And maybe it's just a shoulder massage and having, kissing your partner's shoulders. Maybe it's sharing something you appreciate and then making out for a couple of minutes. Even if you don't have time for it to become a whole thing, but maybe it's reading from a sexy, sensual book that turns you both on, and even talking about and discovering what you might fill these 5 minutes with could be really nurturing for the partnership. There's maybe it's a book about deepening connection that you want to read a chapter from and then talk about it. Maybe you've been longing to maybe, this is a fun one, maybe if we meet Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, maybe on Monday is my day to ask for something that would be really nurturing for me. On Wednesday is your day to ask for something that's really nurturing for you. And on Friday, we do something together, holding one another, breathing, kissing. And so maybe on Monday when it's my turn, I just want to put my head in your lap and have you stroke my hair and tell me how much you love me. Maybe that's what I would really like. So I get to ask for that. Maybe on Wednesday, you have a totally different vision. Your shoulders have been tight and you just really want a shoulder massage. Or tiny kisses all over your face. This is a great place to brainstorm of what would feel really, really good for me. These little bite-sized pieces that would feel really good for me. And this is important, if when I talk about these things, or when you think about, if I think about my partner asking me to give them tiny kisses all over their face, I feel an absolute bristle and a no. First of all, you get to say no if your partner asks for something that isn't right for you. You get to, absolutely, no problem. And then you can negotiate together what could feel right. So that's really important to note. And second of all, if what your partner is asking you for is making you feel tight, shut down, a little bristle, feel a no inside, this is really important information. That means that there's likely, there could be so many things, but one thing that it might mean is that there are more conversations that need to be had before you feel safe and comfortable for intimacy. And this is important if you are a couple that hasn't been having a lot of connection or sexual intimacy. There's usually deeper reasons why that's happening. It's usually not just logistical. So navigating these logistical things is going to be important, but also recognizing that there may be deeper things that need to be uncovered, things that need to be either discussed or understood between you before you can feel really safe to open to connection in new ways during these times that you'd like to invest in. That's it. Listening to your body and not overriding it is the number one most important thing if what we're pointing toward is intimacy. Because we're not just pointing toward, I want to be the kind of person who invests in my partnership, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to push through. And now we're people who cuddle 3 times a week, and then we have a nice sexy time once a week, and that's what we do, and we checked that box. That could work for you, maybe. For me, my interest, what I'm most excited about is how to light the path, how to point you toward depth of intimacy and connection. And the depth of intimacy and connection sometimes can be highly nurtured and nourished just by making time, just by asking for what you need and making time to receive that from one another. That could take you several steps depending on what's moving in your relationship. And sometimes what's needed is actually just additional support, because the roadblocks in the way of the intimacy are just much bigger that you haven't made time for one another. And that's the kind of thing that I support people with. So those were some ideas for the shorter period of time that you're looking at investing together. And then for that 30 to 90 minute time, I'm just going to give you one exercise that's similar to one of the shorter time exercises. And it's one of the easiest. I just want to make this so it's not, you don't have to take a ton of notes about what I'm saying. It's literally just gonna stick with you, and you could bring it to your partner tonight, is to play this little game where you split the time in half, and half of that time one partner gets to ask for exactly what they would like, And half of that time, the other partner gets to ask for exactly what they would like. If it's 30 minutes, you each get 15 minutes. If it's an hour and a half, you each get 45, right? You know how to do that math. This is really similar to what I was talking about in the shorter ones. Maybe somebody gets Monday and somebody gets Wednesday to choose what you would like. And again, the really important communication you're going to bring in here is when you ask your partner for what you'd like the most, there's a discussion before you go forward, before you receive it. Hey, what I'd really like is a shoulder rub. Okay, well, honestly, I am so exhausted from this week and my carpal tunnel's been acting up and I want to give you what you want, but I just don't feel like I'm really well equipped to give you that. Is there something else that would feel good? That's really important because we want to hold that intention that we do want to connect with our partner. We want to let them know that we are excited about connecting and meeting this need potentially. And yet it's okay that it's not in alignment with what we want and what we are able to show up with. That's totally allowed. And then the partner might say, well, okay, well, could you just do like soft touches on my back? Is that something you feel possible? Yes, that works for me. Great. So you negotiate until you find something that feels okay for both of you. Again, if you try this and you find yourself at an impasse where nothing is feeling good for both of you, it's just an indicator. It's just pointing us toward, okay, there's deeper things that we need support with before we can go forward with exploring intimacy in new ways. And that's okay. That is true for so many of us. It's okay. Sometimes we all just need a different kind of support and help, and that is okay. And of course, this also goes for during that longer time, you might ask for something that is more explicitly sexual. And that might require more negotiation of, well, in order to feel ready to do that, I might need my turn first, and I would need this, and this in order for my body to feel open to that. Or it might be a hard no, and this is where we get to flex those muscles of, I'm just a no for that right now, or I'm just a no for that right now given what's happening in our relationship. Because look, sometimes that time that you've scheduled, your Saturday night from 6 to 9 or something that you've scheduled to be together, maybe that falls right after you had a difficult moment together or a difficult week, or there's family stuff going on that's uncomfortable. Maybe it's just really not right for you to, your body, your being, your whole self just isn't really ready for something sexual. That is allowed. That's absolutely allowed. Just because we're making the time to point toward and focus on these things doesn't mean that it's just automatically going to be there for you. Likely, if there's been a lot of spaciousness, there are going to be underlying things that are going to need to be addressed before especially something really highly sexual or highly intimate is going to be enjoyed by both partners. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there for today, and I am always open to your questions. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you're receiving so much from this podcast. If you liked it, please make sure to follow it wherever you get your podcasts, to like it, to write us a review, share about this with your friends, take an episode, share your favorite episode with a friend. It really, really helps. We're just beginning here, and it makes a big difference to have those shares and those likes. So thank you so much in advance for that. If you are interested in getting some support from me, maybe some one-on-one support as you're looking to move towards your partner, you're looking to reinvest in your partnership, you can contact me directly through the website, charumorgan.com, and we always put that link in the show notes. And there's lots of information also on the website about the ways that I do work with people in that deepening, in that enhancing your connection, in coming back together again, in going to new places in your connection, in your lovemaking. I'm here for all of that. So thank you so much for being here, and I will see you again next week.